What if I told you that there is a place where time has stopped, but mysteries continue to multiply? Chernobyl, the site of one of the worst nuclear disasters in history, is not just an abandoned territory. It has become an open-air laboratory where nature has defied all predictions and radiation has shaped a completely unexpected ecosystem. Some discoveries made there are simply unbelievable. From animals that have developed surprising mutations to artifacts left behind that tell a disturbing story. But what has really been found in Chernobyl that intrigues both scientists and curious minds alike? How can a place marked by so much destruction hide such unexpected phenomena? Hey, restless minds, I'm Code, and this is Discover It, the channel where curiosity knows no limits. If you love exploring the unknown, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss anything. Every like, comment, and share helps spread these discoveries to more people. So, let's build a community where curiosity transforms the world. And without further ado, let's get into the video. In the heart of Chernobyl's exclusion zone, a silent warning still stands. The iconic radiation sign, corroded by time, continues to mark the boundary between the safe world and the forbidden territory. Its yellowed paint, cracks, and accumulated rust over the decades reveal its age. But its message remains clear, a warning against an invisible danger. Anyone who crosses this barrier enters a land where the laws of nature have been irreversibly altered, a place where past and present merge into a scene of abandonment and unsettling silence. You know those do not cross signs? Well, this is the ultimate version of that. If signs could scream, this one would be shouting, "Get out of here, dude!" But guess what? Some people see it as an invitation. Around the sign, Pripyat continues to be swallowed by nature. The crumbling buildings hide among trees that grow unchecked, and faded warning signs attempt, in vain, to deter intruders. But this barrier has never been a real obstacle. Urban explorers, scientists, and even looters continue to cross the border, defying the logic of danger. Some see the sign as a grim reminder of the disaster, while others view it as an adrenaline-fueled challenge. What drives someone to ignore such a clear warning? Over time, mysterious graffiti has appeared near the sign, adding a layer of symbolism to the location. Dark silhouettes, cryptic messages, and disturbing drawings seem to converse with the tragedy, turning the area into a macabre urban art gallery. While radiation remains active and invisible, human traces become more present, creating an unsettling paradox. In the end, is Chernobyl's greatest danger not the radiation, but humanity's insistence on challenging the unknown? At the epicenter of the tragedy stands one of modern engineering's most impressive constructions, the colossal Chernobyl sarcophagus. Built to contain the devastation caused by the explosion of Reactor 4, this enormous shield is not just a barrier against radiation. It represents humanity's struggle to control the uncontrollable. Its imposing presence is a constant reminder that danger still lurks beneath tons of steel and concrete, a dormant but never defeated threat. The first version of this shield was hastily erected in 1986, built amidst deadly levels of radiation. The workers who assembled it paid a heavy price, and the result was an unstable structure riddled with cracks that for decades allowed radioactive particles to escape. Over time, the threat of collapse forced the construction of a new sarcophagus, larger and more resistant, designed to last 100 years. But in the face of relentless radioactivity, will a century be enough? Installing this new dome was an unprecedented operation. Weighing over 36,000 tons, it was built at a safe distance and then slid over the damaged reactor in a millimeter-precise maneuver. Thousands of workers, trucks, and cranes were involved in this colossal effort to prevent another disaster. Yet despite all this technology, the most terrifying question remains unanswered. Will we ever be able to completely eliminate this threat? The explosion at Chernobyl not only turned a city into ruins, but also altered the very genetic code of the living beings that remained in the region. Decades later, scientists are still studying strange mutations that defy biological understanding. Birds have been born with extra toes, frogs have changed color to protect themselves from radiation, and even the wolves of the exclusion zone display unusual characteristics. But are these mutations merely temporary anomalies, or are we witnessing the beginning of a new form of adaptation? Researchers have documented some of these astonishing changes. Birds in the region, for example, have developed elevated levels of melanin, making them darker, a possible defense mechanism against radiation. Meanwhile, frogs that were once green now exhibit an intense black coloration, a genetic alteration that may be linked to cellular protection. Among mammals, wolves stand out for their surprising resistance to radiation, raising the intriguing possibility that these predators are evolving to survive in a highly contaminated environment. However, not all mutations are beneficial. Some animals exhibit severe deformities, fertility problems, and shortened lifespans. For scientists, Chernobyl has become a living laboratory on the effects of radiation on species evolution. But the big question remains: are these changes just temporary biological adjustments, or are we witnessing the birth of a new generation of beings shaped by nuclear disaster? When the evacuation order was issued, thousands of people abandoned their homes, taking only the essentials. But a small group of elderly individuals, mostly women, made an unthinkable decision. They returned to their land, ignoring the risks of radiation. For these grandmothers, staying in Chernobyl was not an act of madness, but a matter of belonging. They preferred to face contamination rather than live away from what they had always known. Many of these women had already survived brutal periods in Soviet history, famine, wars, and political repression. Compared to those hardships, radiation seemed like just another challenge. And so, they returned to their abandoned villages, growing food in contaminated soil, and living as if the disaster had never happened. The most astonishing part? Contrary to medical predictions, many of them lived for decades, seemingly unaffected by the devastation that claimed so many others. Scientists are trying to understand this phenomenon. Some believe that their natural, non-processed diet contributed to their resilience. Others point to psychological factors. Their deep connection to their homeland may have strengthened their health and immunity. But the question remains: is it possible that the power of the mind and a strong bond with one's roots can help overcome even the effects of radiation? When the city was evacuated, residents were forced to leave their pets behind. However, the dogs that remained in the exclusion zone not only survived but formed a population that continues to grow today. Without humans to feed or protect them, these dogs faced a hostile environment full of invisible dangers. But how did they manage to adapt to one of the most contaminated areas in the world? And that's how a pack of stray dogs became the rulers of a ghost city. Kind of like Resident Evil, but without the zombies, just the radiation. And the craziest part? These dogs might have developed resistance to it. The answer may lie in natural selection. At first, many dogs succumbed to the intense cold, hunger, and radiation. But those who survived passed their genes on, creating generations more adapted to the new environment. Recent studies indicate that these dogs have developed distinct genetic patterns compared to regular domestic dogs, suggesting that they may be acquiring resistance to radiation. Today, these animals roam the ruins, some interacting with a few humans who visit the region. Volunteers conduct vaccination campaigns and provide food, but the future of these dogs remains uncertain. If their mutations are inherited, we may be witnessing the emergence of a new lineage of dogs adapted to a radioactive world. Could nature have found a way to outmaneuver the effects of radiation? In the surroundings of the Chernobyl power plant, an entire forest changed color after the disaster. Trees that were once green turned red almost instantly due to the massive dose of radiation they received. The Red Forest, as it became known, became one of the most contaminated places on Earth, an environment where life seemed to have been eradicated in seconds. But as the years passed, something unexpected happened. Although many trees died, new forms of life began to emerge. Some plants developed mutations that made them more resistant to radiation, while certain insects and small animals started to reappear. For scientists, this resurgence raises intriguing questions about nature's resilience. How can such a hostile place sustain any form of life? An even stranger phenomenon was discovered. Decomposition in the red forest has almost ceased. Fallen tree trunks from decades ago remain intact because the bacteria responsible for this process have been affected by the radiation. This creates a dangerous problem. If organic matter continues to accumulate without decomposing, future fires could spread radioactive dust into the air. What would happen if this contaminated material began circulating across the planet again? In the center of the ghost town of Pripyat, an amusement park remains untouched by time, its rusted and silent attractions witnessing a future that never happened. The Ferris wheel, which was supposed to light up the skies with joy, was never officially inaugurated. The bumper cars, now covered in moss and radioactive dust, never received the laughter of the children who eagerly awaited the park's opening. The place, meant to symbolize happiness, ended up becoming one of Chernobyl's most haunting icons. Reports suggest that the park may have been briefly opened before the evacuation, possibly to calm the population amid the first suspicions that something was wrong. If this is true, those who played there in the days leading up to the disaster may have been among the first to be exposed to dangerous levels of radiation. The image of the lone Ferris wheel, frozen in time, carries a heavy symbolism, a cruel contrast between the promise of a bright future and the reality of a tragedy that cut everything short. Today, the park is one of the most visited spots in the exclusion zone. Urban explorers and tourists capture images of the forgotten attractions, often without realizing the deep historical weight they carry. But as one walks through the abandoned rides, the question arises, will Pripyat ever be inhabited again? Or will this park remain a silent monument to a dream that never came true? Days before the Chernobyl explosion, workers at the power plant began reporting sightings of a strange winged creature flying over the structure. Described as a black being with glowing red eyes, this enigmatic omen became known as the Black Bird of Chernobyl. For some, it was merely a collective illusion, a result of stress. For others, it was a supernatural warning that something terrible was about to happen. What's most curious is that this legend has parallels with another famous case, the Mothman, a creature reportedly seen in Point Pleasant, USA, before the collapse of the Silver Bridge in 1967. In both cases, witnesses described feelings of fear, intense nightmares, and a sense of impending disaster after the supposed sighting. This raises an intriguing question. Could there be an unknown pattern, a phenomenon that precedes major tragedies? To this day, there is no concrete evidence of the blackbird's existence. Some believe the reports may have been caused by large birds native to the region, such as ravens or eagles. Others see this legend as a metaphor for the disaster to come. Either way, the mystery persists, and the story of this entity continues to haunt those trying to understand the events that led to the worst nuclear accident in history. In the empty hallways of Pripyat schools, one detail stands out. Hundreds of children's gas masks scattered across the floor, as if they were pieces of a macabre puzzle. These devices, designed to protect against chemical and biological attacks, were never used at the city's most critical moment. Instead of saving lives, they became symbols of a poorly managed disaster and a population deceived about the real danger they faced. Imagine a horror movie scene. You're walking through an abandoned school, and suddenly, BM, a sea of gas masks on the floor. And the worst part? They were never used when they were needed most. This place screams tragedy in every direction. Days before the explosion, Students in local schools underwent training to use the masks, unaware that they would soon face an invisible and relentless enemy. When Reactor 4 exploded, Soviet authorities took 36 hours to order an evacuation, enough time for radiation to saturate the air. Amid the chaos of departure, the masks were left behind along with notebooks, toys, and fragments of lives that would never be resumed. Today, these masks cover the floors of classrooms as a grim reminder of the tragedy. They not only illustrate the negligence of the Soviet government, but also raise an unsettling question. How many lives could have been saved if the authorities had acted with more transparency and speed? Have we learned this lesson, or are we still repeating the same mistakes in times of crisis? In the dark waters of the reservoirs near the Chernobyl power plant, something unexpected is happening. Giant catfish, measuring up to 2 meters, swim freely in an environment where radiation has contaminated everything around them. These massive creatures, resembling prehistoric predators, fascinate and frighten scientists and visitors alike. But what is the real reason behind their excessive growth? Many believe that radiation may have caused genetic mutations in the fish, making them grow beyond their normal size. However, studies suggest the answer may be simpler. With no natural predators and no human interference, the catfish had time to grow much larger than they would in normal environments. Since Chernobyl has become an isolated ecosystem, the animals living there follow their own unique development rules. Despite their intimidating size, these fish pose no real threat to humans. After all, human presence in the exclusion zone is minimal. But the question remains: has radiation had an invisible impact on these animals, subtly altering their genetics? Or are they simply an example of how nature can recover in surprising ways when left undisturbed? Despite the invisible dangers, Chernobyl has become an unusual tourist destination. People from all over the world travel to explore the ghost city of Pripyat, walk among the abandoned buildings, and witness the post-apocalyptic landscape left behind by the disaster. But what drives someone to visit a place where radiation is still a real threat? The experience is described as unsettling. Classrooms still have notebooks on desks, apartments remain furnished and untouched, and children's toys lie scattered on the floor, as if people had vanished overnight. The absolute silence of the city, combined with the wind blowing through the abandoned structures, creates a surreal atmosphere, almost like a portal to the past. Tourism in the exclusion zone, however, is controversial. While some see the visit as an act of learning and respect for the tragedy, others criticize those who treat the site as a horror-themed park. Selfies next to the rusted Ferris wheel, radioactive souvenirs, and challenge videos filmed inside unstable buildings raise the question: are we truly learning from history, or are we just turning disaster into entertainment? In the empty and silent hallways of Pripyat, shadowy figures seem to watch those who dare to venture into the abandoned city. These silhouettes, painted on peeling walls and broken windows, are the mark of urban artists who defied radiation to transform the ruins into a haunting art gallery. But what drives someone to leave their signature in such a forgotten and dangerous place? The shadows depict former residents of Pripyat, workers, children, and entire families whose lives were interrupted by the explosion. Some figures appear to run through the corridors, while others hold the hands of loved ones who are no longer there. This art creates a chilling effect, almost as if these urban ghosts are trapped in time, reminding everyone that this city was once full of life. Not everyone sees this artistic intervention as something positive. Some believe that Pripyat should remain untouched as an unchangeable monument to the disaster. Others see the shadows as a way to give voice to those who lost everything on that night in April 1986. In the end, the lingering question is: where does respect for history end, and where does the need to reinterpret it begin? Among the many abandoned buildings in Pripyat, one in particular carries a dark and terrifying history: the city's hospital. It was here that the first responders and power plant workers arrived, unaware that they were being poisoned by radiation. While trying to contain what seemed like an ordinary fire, those firefighters and plant employees were exposed to lethal doses of contamination, turning this hospital into the first stage of Chernobyl's true horror. If there's one place in Pripyat I wouldn't enter even if I were paid, it's this hospital. The first responders turned into the first victims. These guys were trying to save lives without realizing they were being slowly poisoned. Insane. In the basement of the building, the uniforms of these responders still remain highly radioactive. The men who wore them, unaware of the severity of the situation, carried radiation into the hospital, contaminating rooms, hallways, and equipment. Today, these garments are so dangerous that any prolonged contact could be fatal. It serves as a reminder that those who tried to contain the disaster were, in fact, its first victims. The hospital, once a place of healing and safety, is now a scene of desolation. Surgical rooms with rusted equipment, stretchers covered in dust, and syringes scattered across the floor create an eerie atmosphere. Those who dare to walk through its hallways describe a suffocating sensation, as if the suffering of that night still lingers in the air. The question that echoes through the abandoned walls is, how many unsung heroes lost their lives here before realizing they were fighting an invisible enemy? For decades, the Chernobyl tragedy was shrouded in secrecy and misinformation. The Soviet government downplayed the severity of the accident while crucial documents were either hidden or destroyed. But over time, forgotten papers and classified records began to emerge, revealing a story even more terrifying than previously imagined. Could the disaster have been prevented? Internal reports from the time indicate that our BMK reactors had known structural flaws long before the explosion. Engineers had warned about the risks, but in a system where admitting mistakes could jeopardize careers and reputations, these warnings were ignored. Furthermore, after the accident, radiation measurements were deliberately manipulated to avoid panic, while the people of Pripyat walked around unaware that they were already being contaminated. Today, declassified documents reveal that the Soviet Union attempted to cover up the environmental and human damage caused by the accident. The evacuation was delayed, medical reports were suppressed, and even the power plant workers had no real idea of the level of danger they faced. The big question that remains is, how many lives could have been saved if the truth had been told from the beginning? In the years following the disaster, farmers near the exclusion zone began noticing something strange. Calves were born with deformities, pigs had atrophied limbs, and birds had crooked beaks or wings smaller than normal. The genetic mutations caused by radiation were a chilling reminder that contamination didn't end with humans. It infiltrated the very DNA of the living beings in the region. In the first years after the explosion, the anomalies were more extreme. Animals were born with exposed organs, multiple heads, or missing limbs. Many of these offspring did not survive long, but those that did carried marks that set them apart forever. Some of these changes disappeared over time, while others became hereditary, raising questions about the long-term impact of radiation on local wildlife. If nature had a hard mode button, Chernobyl smashed it with full force. This is one place where evolution and mutation gave each other a pretty eerie handshake. Scientists are still studying whether these animals are merely suffering the side effects of radiation or if they are developing some form of resistance. Studies suggest that some species are producing antioxidants at elevated levels as a biological mechanism to neutralize cellular damage. If true, Chernobyl may have become an accidental laboratory for a previously unknown type of evolution. The question remains, can life truly adapt to such a hostile environment, or will these genetic changes still exact a heavy toll on future generations? Chernobyl is not just a contaminated site. It is a testament to the consequences of an irreversible human error. From the forgotten warning sign at the entrance to the Soviet Union's secret files, every piece of this history tells a fragment of a disaster that changed the world. Among genetic mutations, ghost cities, and monuments to destruction, the 1986 tragedy left scars that have yet to be fully understood. What makes Chernobyl so fascinating is the paradox it represents. While radiation remains active, wildlife thrives. While the city stays empty, tourists take risks to explore it. Between fear and curiosity, the exclusion zone has become a symbol of a past that was never fully buried. But will we ever be able to completely eliminate this threat, or will we always be dealing with the shadows of what was left behind? If you enjoyed this journey of discoveries, don't forget to leave a like, share it with friends, and comment below on what caught your attention the most. Maybe others will relate, and we can create a great discussion. And of course, subscribe to the channel for more content where curiosity knows no limits.